In hindsight, I should have listened to the Kill Bill alarms in my head when 8-year-old Cassie announced she and her cabin mates were going to skip out on camp activities and play Operation instead. Though it's not like I didn't have things on my mind. 7 counselors had gone missing, along with our head counselor who was supposed to be taking care of us. It started out fairly normal. I mean, 1 or 2 counselors wasn't bad, right? Lily and Joey had been drowning in sexual tension for a while, so nobody was surprised when they sneaked into the woods for what I could only guess was the most uncomfortable sex ever. But then they didn't come back. Teddy and Yuri went to look for them, and then they also disappeared. It was almost like a wild animal was lying in wait for another unsuspecting teenager to cross its path. With 6 of us left, I was definitely freaking out. I wasn't expecting summer camp to be like this. I did consider working in my local Sephora, but Mom had a preference. And whether I was 18 years old or not, she was getting her way. So it was goodbye civilization and hello Canadian wilderness. There were 15 kids queued up in front of me for lunch, and I was having a hard time keeping that optimistic Camp Redwood smile. I couldn't help constantly counting how many hours it had been since the latest disappearance. Connor. He was supposed to be helping with getting the emergency generator going after the electricity sizzled out. The boy was gone an hour later. This was happening fast. Whatever was going on with the counselors was burning through all of us. Would it happen to me? I had seen so many TV shows and movies set in a summer camp where every camper and counselor was doomed to die in the grossest way possible. Was that going to happen to us? I tightened my grip around the stupid ladle. I had found myself stirring a giant pot of chocolate syrup. Watching watery chocolate drip from the edge, I felt nauseous. Of all the summer camps Mom had to send me to, it had to be the one with vanishing counselors and 0 adult authority, which meant we were the authority. 12 teenagers who came to relax and babysit a bunch of little kids before college. We had to put on brave faces and pretend everything was absolutely fine, and we weren't all terrified out of our damn minds. At the corner of my eye, I glimpsed Harry offering piggybacks to a bunch of little kids, with one of the littles, Eleanor, wrapping her arms around his neck and squealing. From the look on the boy's face, he wanted to stop. It was hard to keep a facade when reality was becoming harder and harder to bear. Abandoning his hat entirely, Harry was dripping with sweat, trying to twist his lips into the Camp Redwood grin. But looking closer as he galloped across the cabin with Eleanor holding on for dear life, the guy was ready to collapse. I didn't blame him. Entertaining the kids was supposed to be Teddy's assignment, and he was who knows where. I had taken over lunch duties for Lily, who had joined the long list of the missing. Harry was supposed to be joining the search party for the missing counselors, but I'd ended up becoming the little's personal punching bag. When I first met him, Harry Carlyle had been the kid who sat on the sidelines and offered sarcastic remarks and crude jokes. Now he had been reduced to a playground ride the kids pretended didn't have an off switch. He had enjoyed maybe the first 2 rides to raise morale, but now I could see the strain in his eyes. Ow! Harry winced when the little girl's fingers prodded at his eyes. Hey, Eleanor, not my eyes! He was dangerously close to toppling over, though he managed to catch his footing, ordering all of them off of his back. Horse rides are over! He cupped his mouth, shouting across the cabin when a group of kids surrounded him with equally terrifying faces. Harry backed away and threw his hands up. Come on, guys! My back isn't built for all of you! Horsey! The kids shouted back in a cacophony of giggles. It was 10 against 1. Against 2 if I got involved, which wasn't going to happen. There was no way I was putting effort into play fighting a bunch of 8-year-olds. Harry shot me a hopeful look, though I pretended not to see, busying myself with slightly burned nuggets. Running his fingers through his thick strands of sandy-colored hair, Harry pulled a face when a little girl, Phoebe, was brave enough to step forward. No! Harry shook his head, squeezing the front of his counselor shirt practically glued to him. The temperature still hadn't let up, and it was heading towards 8 p.m. Nighttime, I thought dizzily. It was almost bedtime and still no adults. I refuse to surrender, he told her. Phoebe, I'm not joking around when I say my back is hurting. We've been playing horsies for 2 hours. So? Harry couldn't yell or hiss or swear at them. That was a big no-no with kids. However, I could see he was coming close to breaking that rule. "Because I'm tired," he said through a Camp Redwood grin, which was quickly turning into a grimace. I think all of us had given up with the fake enthusiasm when our colleagues started to vanish. Now we were just shells of our former happy selves. "And, did you know that if you ride horsey at this time, the ghosts will come and get you?" When a boy opened his mouth, his eyes widening with fright, Harry realized his mistake. I mean the nice ghosts. Yeah, the nice ghosts who hunt. I mean play in the woods. It's a well-known Camp Redwood legend that ghosts don't like horse rides. In fact," his lips curved into a devilish smile. Now he had several faces staring at him. The kids dropped onto the ground to listen, their hands clasped in their laps. This was the quietest they had been all day. I could understand, though. Harry had taken the reins around the campfire telling ghost stories for 3 nights in a row, and the guy was a damn good storyteller. With every eye on him, Harry lowered his voice into a whisper. "Do you guys want to know what they do?" The kids nodded with wide eyes. "They sneak into unsuspecting cabins." "Harry!" Rowan's voice came from outside in a warning. The window was open and the guy was standing watch to see if any counselors came back. Since the only adult had disappeared, he had been appointed leader, and the guy was taking himself a little too seriously. His warning was valid, though. Sometimes Harry's ghost stories were a little too scary for the kids, whose imaginations tend to run wild, especially at night. Olive, my cabin mate, had to give up her bed for a little girl who was convinced Harry's depiction of Slender Man, the tree boy, was going to sneak into her bed and turn her into an apple seed. "Did I say sneak into cabins? I meant dance around the woods," Harry corrected himself. "And they look for their next unsuspecting victim." "Harry!" "Friend." Harry swallowed his words when a little boy's eyes went wide. I mean, they are looking for a friend. So the point of my story is, horsey rides get us new friends?" Phoebe wasn't buying it. I could tell from the slight arch of her brow and her widening smile. The girl shook dark curls out of her face, smirking. I think it was her pleading eyes which won him over, because with a sigh which definitely wasn't joking around, the guy dropped onto his knees and practically spat at her to climb on his back, and she did, plonking one sparkling shoe on top of the boy's spine, with enough force to send him onto his stomach. I might have been imagining it, but since when were these littles so outlandishly spiteful? The little girl was grinning, not because she could ride her horsey, but because Harry looked like he was going to either wring her neck or wring his own. Mom had a talk before I started here, and she made sure to tell me that if adult authority is nowhere to be seen, little kids will start to act out. I could definitely call it acting out. But I had spent all day with her several days earlier playing with dolls and having a teddy bear picnic, when she admitted she didn't want to swim in the lake with the other kids. Phoebe had been shy and only spoke to me through her teddy bear, so what had changed? Could the lack of adults really be scaring the kids that much? "Miss Josie?" I wasn't paying attention, half noticing some kids had just helped themselves, piling chicken nuggets and cookies on plastic plates, and hurrying to their seats like I couldn't see them. Blinking away brain fog, I found myself face to face with Eli, who is probably my favorite camper. You're not supposed to have personal preferences when working with little kids, because your opinions could upset them. However, it was incredibly hard not to like Eli. Hiding behind a mop of brown curls, the boy was one of the more vocal kids in the group. Eli said he wanted to be an inventor when he was older, and he wanted to make robots. The kid had asked me if I wanted to see his robot collection, but I was too busy with setting up camp activities. Standing in front of me and clutching his tray, the boy was frowning. "Josie, I just saw some kids steal chicken nuggets." I shrugged, shoveling a large portion on his tray. "Well, you can have some extra too." Eli's smile wasn't as big as usual. "Where's Teddy?" I pretended to be oblivious, hastily adding more nuggets to his tray as if I could keep his mouth shut with extra food. "He'll be back soon. Teddy is just playing in the woods." "No, he's not." At first I thought I'd heard the boy wrong. The kid wasn't looking at me, counting his nuggets as usual with the prongs of his plastic fork. I leaned forward with my best smile. "I'm sorry. What was that, Eli?" The kid lifted his head with a wide grin. "Can I borrow a knife, Josie?" "Why do you need a knife?" Leaning forward, the boy shrugged. "There's a squirrel caught in a trap," he said. I want to put it out of its misery, Miss Josie. It's in a lot of pain." That was dark. Well, I can't give you a knife." I trailed off, my gaze finding Harry in the growing line of kids awaiting a horse ride. "But how about you go and ask Harry for a piggyback ride?" I pointed to myself with a forced grin. "I'll save the squirrel." And when the boy's eyes filled with tears and he shook his head, I reached out, grasped his hand, and squeezed it as tight as I could. "Eli, we don't need to do that, okay? I'm sure the squirrel can be saved, and I'll make sure to take it to the vet, okay?" "But what if it doesn't need saving?" I squeezed tighter. "I'll save it, Eli. I promise." Eli didn't look convinced, but he nodded with a grumble. "Okay," he said before twisting around and joining the other kids torturing Harry. Immediately I left my station, whether Rowan liked it or not, and headed outside to look for this supposedly dying squirrel. That was something we didn't need. The sky was darkening when I made it into the woods, cotton candy clouds blurring through the thick canopy of trees. Eli said it was near the sign pointing towards the lake, though I couldn't see anything. Odd. That thought retracted in my head, however, when I stepped forward and a squelching sound cut through the silence of my own heavy breaths, mixing with insect chitters and nightlife buzzing above me and beneath me. The wet-sounding squelch twisted my gut, and when I stared down at the ground, I didn't know what I was expecting. A squashed squirrel, perhaps? In Eli's words, the poor thing had been on the edge of death. Though, when I was thinking about it, there was no animal traps around camp. That was basic health and safety. So what the hell was I looking at? The bottom of my shoe was caked in dried blood, but it was the thing which was stamped into the dirt which sent my heart into my throat. It looked like an eye. But looking closer as I lowered myself to the ground, I glimpsed something metallic, something glistening around the pupil. I picked up a stick and prodded it. Though the thing didn't move, it was definitely an eye. The eye of some kind of animal, judging from the pigmentation and the color of the iris. But it was the metallic pieces around the eye which was throwing me off. Part of a trap, maybe? It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that a poor critter had been ripped apart, and a wild bear had dropped its dinner near the camp, and the metal encasing its eye was most likely pieces of trap. Peering closer, though, I glimpsed silver slithers in what appeared to be the destroyed nerve caked to my shoe. After scraping most of it off, I caught glistening pieces of blood-stained metal catching the late-setting sun. And this time I pinched a piece between my forefinger and thumb. It didn't look like a bear trap. The metal itself wasn't serrated or old. In fact, it was new. Which begged the question, what was this thing? Whatever it was, it had started converting what looked like a critter's eye before stopping. Was it a virus? When that thought slammed into me, I fell back with a hiss, swiping my hands on my shirt. "What are you doing?" I almost jumped out of my skin, diving to my feet. Carmel was standing behind me, grasping what looked like her 6th or 7th coffee. The girl had been running to and from the coffee machine all day, and I had been silently counting how much caffeine she was consuming. Carmel had been a well-put-together and fairly popular girl when camp started. She immediately had everyone following her beck and call, all of the boys and girls following her around. Carmel wasn't straight. She made that clear on the bus to camp, announcing she wasn't interested in guys and that she had a girlfriend back home. Still, though, the guys followed her because, well, she was pretty. Carmel was my bunkmate and had woken me up on 3 separate occasions at 6 a.m. to go through the exact same hair and makeup routine. Now, though, there was no sign of makeup or even that she had brushed her hair. Instead of its usual tidy blonde ponytail, Carmel's curls were tied into raggedy pigtails with ribbons. I was sure she had stolen from a camper's doll. I think what was keeping her going was coffee. Carmel regarded me with 2 wide eyes and a Camp Redwood smile we all knew was fake. She was grasping onto her coffee cup for dear life. "Josie!" She jumped when I jumped, which almost made me laugh. "Rowan's having an emergency meeting in his cabin," she said. "So, whatever you're doing can wait." Her gaze flicked to the ground. "What are you doing?" For a brief moment, I considered telling Carmel I may have found what looked like a virus which turned flesh and blood to metal, before I remembered her reaction when a spider had crept into our cabin. Whatever this thing was, keeping it a secret for now was probably what was best. Making sure I was standing on the thing, I shrugged. I was looking for the others. Carmel cocked her head before resting her coffee on the ground. "In the dirt?" Footprints, Carmel. The girl looked confused before shaking her head. Okay, whatever. Tell the others I'll be there in a sec. I just need to make sure the kids are okay. We're putting a movie on for them in the lunch hall, so that will hopefully distract them for maybe 2 hours. I nodded. Did anyone find a phone? Not with signal. Carmel. I had to fight back the urge to yell at her to keep her voice down. Kids were curious, and I wouldn't be surprised if we had some littles peeking into our conversation. You're okay, I said softly. I mean, we're not okay. Because, yes, things are very screwed up right now, but we need to be optimistic. I exhaled out a breath, searching for eyes in the dark. I tried to smile, tried to keep up that Camp Redwood facade we were all held hostage by until the last day of camp. According to Rule 5 in the Camp Redwood Counselor Handbook, all counselors must retain a smile and a positive attitude. If any counselor is caught making a frowny face or spreading what we call unhappiness, we will be forced to send the counselor home. At this point, I didn't give a damn, but part of me didn't want to scare the little kids. No, Josie, the girl grasped a hold of my shoulders with a grin rivaling the Joker. I am so sick of being told to keep smiling, because what is that doing? 3 of my cabin mates are missing, and I'm the only one left, and Rowan and Co. expect me to keep up this act? We're screwed. She cupped her mouth. Screwed. We have 0 adults. An unexplainable loss of power every few hours, which makes no sense in the middle of nowhere. I mean, what the hell is out there which is sucking that much power, huh? There is no explanation. There should be an explanation. I should be able to think, oh yeah, that's why. But no, things are happening, and I don't know why they're happening. Rowan is trying to force us to act like things are okay, but in reality, he is crapping himself, Josie. We are all crapping ourselves. I took a step back, keeping hold of her hand. Carmel was trembling, her hands clammy and slimy and tangled in mine. He's just trying to keep the kids from freaking out. She groaned, tears glistening in her eyes. Okay, yeah, I'm blaming them because they keep acting like everything is okay. Everything is okay. I turned to her with what I hoped was a reassuring smile, knowing damn well about the thing I'd found in the dirt. If that thing could spread, it would have a field day in an enclosed space like a summer camp. I noticed my own hands, which had been touching the thing, making contact with Carmel, and dropped my hands inwardly squirming. If that thing was a virus, I was already screwed. Maybe Carmel too. If it was fast-acting, it could explain the counselor disappearances. I was already putting together a plan in my head as we headed back to the main cabin. We had to put together a search party. Some of us would stay with the kids, while a small group would venture into the woods to try and look for traces of the missing. If I was right, we would find a horror scene in the woods, and yes, that would be the time to panic. If I was wrong, however, there was still hope. Are we going to be okay? Carmel's voice sliced into my thoughts, and it took a moment to drink in the camp around us. Usually, when the sky was turning twilight, it would be bustling with campers and counselors toasting marshmallows on the fire and gathering around to fall asleep to Harry's ghost stories. Carmel would be knelt with a bunch of kids watching a YouTube video they had all insisted on her watching, while Rowan would be hiding behind his book with his knees to his chest, his gaze glued to every page he flicked through, ignoring everyone. Teddy making funny faces for kids who were scared, and Connor handing out plates of burgers and hot dogs. I remembered feeling safe and at home, cozy around the flickering orange of the fire as chatter turned to laughter and white noise in my head. After the kids went back to their cabins, the group of us would resume positions around the fire, but this time it was more intimate. With Allison in her cabin, we kind of ignored her rules altogether. Making out happened because of course it did. Beer stolen from Allison's mini fridge and raging hormones, as well as late-night skinny dipping in the lake did that. Couples went off into the woods, and we all felt completely comfortable and at home with each other. Looking around at that moment, I felt sick to my stomach. That feeling was gone. The feeling of family and familiarity and friendship. What I was looking at now was that same log we had all sat on, now turned on its side. Hot dog buns and candy wrappers littering the ground. There was a ghost camp. I could still see Connor's jacket slung on the ground and Lily's bright pink Ray-Bans sitting on a beer can, because there were no adults to yell at us to clean up after ourselves. I was frowning at the skeleton of the fire when Carmel nudged me. Hey, her voice was shaking slightly. Josie, you didn't answer my question. Carmel wanted me to be the voice of reason, and I wasn't that. I was just as scared as her. There was only so much I could sugarcoat, and I gave up doing that after the third counselor disappeared. All I could offer her was forced optimism. Yes, I said. Just keep the kids busy, all right? Right. When I was twisting around and power walking to Rowan's cabin, I shouted over my shoulder, Give them some of those animal crackers. What animal crackers? I turned to elaborate, but Carmel was gone. When I finally got to Rowan's cabin, I was sweating through my shirt and had an idea of what I was going to tell the others. It was a thing, which could be considered a disease or a virus, so it was vital that we split into two groups. Half of us would search for the others, while the others would look for anything to get in contact with the outside world, an emergency landline, laptop, or cell phone. I did have one problem, which was lack of evidence, all which was left from the thing I found stuck to my foot. The rest of it was buried in the dirt, and it was too dark to search for it, and we would be wasting time doing so. All of that was in my mind and tangled on my tongue. One single string of incomprehensible gibberish I wasn't even sure was English, when I stepped into Rowan's cabin, where 4 sets of eyes met mine. Olive, cross-legged on the floor with her arms folded, Harry pacing up and down with a brand new bruise blooming under his eye, courtesy of Eleanor almost poking his eyes out, and Rowan himself sitting on top bunk, his legs swinging off of the side. The guy wasn't built to be our leader, originally being the laziest of our group, opting for sitting in a tree with a book, rather than helping set up camp activities. Yet he'd become our default guy in charge because he so happened to be wearing the head counselor hat when Allison disappeared. Admittedly, it suited him. The bright red of the cap contrasted his dark curls under a late-setting sun through the back window, setting strands of straying hair on fire. The hat was a little too big for his head, though, slipping over his eyes. Rowan looked like a divorced father of 2, dark circles bruising his eyes and a very dad-like scowl curling on his lips. With a clipboard pressed to his chest and a pen he was chewing on, the boy resembled a grown man who had just caught his daughter coming in after curfew. Josie. Spitting the pen's lid out of his mouth, he scribbled something down. I had no doubt he was tracking my attendance for these stupid crisis meetings. His eyes were wild, scanning me for answers. Where the hell is Carmel? I shut the door behind me, leaning against it with my arms folded. So, we can swear now? Yes. Rowan rolled his eyes. There are no kids here, so go crazy. He pointed at me with the pen. Carmel, where is she? Keeping the kids busy? Callan's muffled voice came from the bottom bunk. I could barely see the guy lying on his stomach, his face stuffed into a pillow. It was my idea to play Shrek for them, but the little craps said they haven't seen it. The boy lifted his head, his lips carved into a scowl. I'm sorry. Am I tripping? Everyone's seen Shrek. Do these kids expect a Minecraft movie? They don't like that either. Harry stopped pacing the cabin. Eleanor looked at me like I was crazy when I asked if she liked it. Fortnite too, Olive said, a cushion pressed to her chest. I suggested playing it a few days ago and 0 kids knew what it was. 6 counselors are missing. Rowan raised his voice over the others' chatter. And you're questioning what games they like? His eyes found mine once more. So, Carmel is with the kids? You're absolutely sure of it? I nodded. Yeah, I just saw her 5 minutes ago. Great, Rowan said sarcastically. I'm sure she won't go missing under mysterious circumstances. Stop. Olive shot him a glare, throwing a cushion in his face. I told you, they're probably lost, or maybe they went to get help. We've all been trained to know every inch of these woods. Rowan catapulted the cushion right back at her. They're not lost. Well, where are they? Callan sat up, bringing his knees to his chest. I'd never seen the guy look this vulnerable. Allison made sense. She probably has some other duties and left us to look after the kids, but 6 counselors? All of them disappearing? Our phone signal completely cutting out, electricity cutting off, not once, but twice? What is even sucking all of our power? I got the emergency generator working. Olive raised her arm. Connor and I managed it before. She trailed off. Before Connor disappeared? Callan finished for her. And before him it was Joey, Lily, Mira, Yuri, Noah, and Teddy, which isn't a damn coincidence. He shot Rowan a look, who glared down at his lap. I could tell the boy didn't want to lead all of us, come up with plans and answer questions we desperately needed answering. His job was to look after us, as well as the littles, and so far he was doing a pretty good job. I could tell by his expression that he thought the opposite, but he had managed to keep the kids from finding out about something as sinister as someone actively kidnapping counselors. He made sure they were fed, entertained, and safe watching a movie, while we were scared for our lives. Rowan was keeping up the facade no matter how scared he was. The boy dropped his head into his lap with a sigh. It looked like he might fall asleep before he slammed the clipboard into his face to wake himself up. Nobody wanted to admit what Callan was saying, but we were all definitely thinking it. This was planned, Callan continued. Someone out here is messing with us, very clearly trying to freak us out. Now they've got 6 of us. He spread out his arms. How long until one of the littles gets taken, huh? A bunch of 18-year-olds aren't going to satisfy them, so what about when they start taking campers? We're in the middle of the damned nowhere with a serial kidnapper on the loose? And did we just leave 15 kids in the care of a girl who thought Australia was in England? In Carmel's defense, she was blackout drunk when she said that, Olive murmured. Voices down, Rowan hissed. Do you want to scare them? His gaze flicked to me. Did you do a head count during dinner? I nodded. 15 kids, all accounted for. 10 are in the lunch hall and 5 girls are in Cassie's cabin playing Operation. All day? Olive spoke up. Weren't they playing that in the morning? I tried to get into their cabin to give them breakfast, but they just shooed me away and locked the door. Hell. Rowan ran his fingers down his face. All right. I'll go and see what's going on with them. Knowing Cassie and her friends, they're probably zonked out on stolen candy. When all of the kids are accounted for in the lunch cabin, we gather outside. I swallowed, speaking up. I actually wanted to talk to you guys about something. Rowan lifted his head, jutting the edge of the clipboard into his chin. Go on. I found something? I pulled a face. I think I found something. I wasn't sure how to explain to a dwindling group of exhausted teenagers that there may be something even more terrifying than potential kidnappers out there. 4 blank faces stared back at me, and Rowan leaned forward with a frown. Like, in general, Josie, we don't have time to go foraging. You should call it a lead, I said, but I need your eyes to find it. Uh-huh, but what is it? Thinking back to what exactly I had seen, I had no idea how to describe it. It's better if I just showed you. Rowan looked skeptical but nodded. All right, Josie, comes with me. We'll check out Allison's cabin again to look for an emergency line, and you can show me whatever this thing is you found. Then we'll escort Cassie and the other girls to the lunch cabin. Every camper needs an escort from now on. The rest of you, act normal. If the kids see you freaking out, they will also freak out. We need to keep up morale. The boy pointed to Olive. Olive, you sit in with the kids and look after them. Callan, check out the emergency generator. Harry, the kids see you as a playground ride, so use that to your advantage. Offer them horse rides if they're scared, and stop with the ghost stories. It's making it worse. Give them piggybacks. Harry rolled his eyes. Do I have a choice? No. Rowan cleared his throat. We all keep up appearances. If the others turn up after getting high or, I don't know, having an orgy in the woods, I will kill them. The way he smiled through his teeth, jumping off the bunk, his toes primed like a wild animal, I knew he wasn't joking. If this was a well-constructed prank the other counselors were playing, I had no doubt Rowan would rip them apart for leaving him as a reluctant leader. To my surprise, the others wandered off with their tasks. And I watched Rowan lift up his pillow and pull out a pack of animal crackers, ripping open the bag and pouring the contents into his mouth. He caught my eye, crunching through many animal crackers. I didn't have lunch, he said through a mouthful. I couldn't help feeling a sense of relief as we headed across camp. Rowan was in front of me while I lagged behind. So, what's the plan? I caught up to him, almost tripping over a log. The guy didn't turn around. I am completely winging it, he said through a choked laugh. I have no idea what I'm doing. If I'm honest, I just want to go home, dude. I haven't looked after this many kids in my life, and if I have to smile one more time as a little brat, I am going to lose my mind. He heaved out a breath. I am making this up as I go along. I laughed that time. That's comforting. Yeah? He turned to shoot me a grin. Well, rest assured I am just about as scared, if not more scared than you. As we stopped in front of Cassie's cabin, his gaze found mine. Is it me? He said softly. Or does this cabin seem quiet? He was right. The windows were dark when they should have been illuminated by the TV screen. Instead of answering, I stepped in front of him, grasping hold of the cabin door. "Cassie?" I knocked 3 times. "Girls, are you okay in there? It's Josie and Rowan." I tried the door and it slid open. Shooting a look at the boy behind me, I turned back to the door. "We're coming in, okay?" "Wait," Cassie squeaked from inside. "But he's not finished." Ignoring the coil of dread unraveling in my gut, I forced the door open and stepped into unusually milky white light which flooded the cabin. The first thing I saw was 8-year-old Cassie, sitting cross-legged with her back to me. She was sitting in a circle with the other girls, no doubt playing their game. When I stepped closer, however, I noticed something pooling across the wooden floor. It must have been juice or water that they had spilled. I took another step, but this time clammy fingers wrapped around my wrist and yanked me back. Rowan didn't speak, but his eyes were elsewhere. Initially, they had been drinking in the cabin before they found oblivion entirely. I heard his breath start to accelerate, his grip tightening on my wrist. I had half a mind to pull away before I saw the body-shaped carcass the girls were sitting around. In the dim light of the cabin, it used to be a person. Teddy. I could still see parts of an identity. Freckled cheeks and eyes which were still open, still staring at the sky. But that was where the similarities to the missing counselor ended. The thing which used to be Teddy was more of a shell, a scooped-out thing resembling a human body. What sent me stumbling backwards, my mouth open in a silent scream, was the almost surgical efficiency of each organ's removal, like it really was a game of operation. His heart, lungs, and intestines were in one pile, while his brain was cupped between little Cassie's bloody hands. And when my gaze found the little girl, Nina, hiding behind dark curly hair, I was seeing what looked like a toy robot's head in her hands. In my head, I was thinking about the eye with the metallic pieces glittering around its pupil, and something turned in my gut. Did I find a human eye? I was staring at the crevice inside the boy's skull, and the boxes of surgical equipment piled on the girls' bunks, when Rowan finally pulled me back, and I was stumbling straight onto my ass. "We need to go," Rowan spoke through a croak. Cassie's words rattled in my head. Teddy, I thought. Teddy wasn't finished. "Josie, get up, now." My head was spinning and I was sure I'd thrown up. I didn't even realize we had managed to stumble from the girls' cabin before cool air grazed my face, tickling my cheeks. Something wet and warm and lumpy was spattering the front of my shirt. Before I could coerce words, the boy was pulling me to my feet and I was seeing stars in my eyes, blinking brightly. When the two of us started forwards in a run, Rowan stopped abruptly. I followed his gaze to find several kids surrounding his cabin, where Harry, Olive, and Callan were. Maybe I was hallucinating, but Eleanor and Phoebe, both of whom wielding weapons where I had no idea where they had gotten them, looked taller? Rowan didn't waste time, dragging me back. "Allison's cabin," he spoke in a cry which became a sob, pulling me across camp, stumbling over rocky ground. "We need a phone. Hell, we need a phone. We need a phone." Rowan was struggling to stand, occasionally bending over and choking up dust. They were playing Operation. Literal Operation. "But they're just kids," I choked out. Little kids who had surgically removed every organ inside Teddy's body. Little kids who were hunting the other counselors down and would surely be coming for us. Allison's cabin was thankfully further into the woods. When we were safe inside and Rowan was locking the door, I dry-heaved several times, unable to get the sight of glistening gore splattering the cabin floor from my mind. "Josie!" Rowan was already tearing apart the cabin. "Work with me here, okay? We don't have time to freak out or to barf. We need to get help, now." Rowan was freaking out, and when he hit the ground on his knees, I took over. I searched Allison's desk first. Nothing of importance, just documents and invoices. Digging through her drawer, there was still nothing. We were running out of time. Abandoning the desk, I went through her suitcase and bags. When I was crawling under her bed to try and find a weapon, Rowan hissed out, "Wait!" When I turned to him, he was still kneeling, but his foot was clamping down on a loose plank. The guy didn't hesitate, pulling at the loose plank, which, to my confusion, revealed what looked to me like a trap door. Rowan turned to me. "You're kidding." I could only stare at the trap door revealing stone steps. He peered down, his voice echoing. Allison has a damn secret bunker? His lips curved into a surprisingly childish grin which took me off guard. Oh, wow, that's so cool. Lifting my head at the sound of loud squealing, I glimpsed a group of littles led by Eleanor stalking towards us. Eleanor had a hostage, Harry, and with the way she was sticking the blade of a scary-looking knife to his throat, I figured she meant business. Their height difference was almost comical. The 18-year-old guy had to hunch over so the little girl could successfully keep him prisoner. Behind them in the trees, I could see something illuminating the dark, an electric blue light bathing their faces. So that was where their power was going. But what the hell were these 8-year-olds doing? Josie! Rowan hissed from down below. He had already climbed down. I joined him, struggling down the stone steps before replacing the loose plank. If these kids were as smart as I thought, it wouldn't take them long to realize the loose plank, also a trapdoor. Allison's bunker was more of a control room. There were multiple screens lit up, a chair in front of a working MacBook. The phone line was cut, but that didn't make sense. The kids were unaware of the bunker, so who cut the phone lines? Rowan was on the laptop, struggling to get through the password protection, so I turned my attention to piles of cardboard boxes. When I opened them, I found myself staring at animal crackers. There were hundreds of them, packed on top of each other. Looking further, digging through the boxes, I found myself a piece of old crumpled paper which looked ancient. Regarding Project Spearhead subjects, please do not ingest unless absolutely necessary. If multiple subjects ingest, please use self-destruct. Only use in such cases such as imminent destruction to the planet, threat of nuclear war. Please contact families in advance. Make sure to ingest with water to avoid neurological symptoms such as psychosis, extreme violence. Please approach subjects with caution. Something ice-cold slithered down my spine. Abandoning the boxes, I searched through a cabinet filled with files which were crumbling apart from age. I picked one at random and flicked through it. Eleanor Summers. Sex, female. Date of birth, 08-05-1977. Initially, I thought I was reading the dates wrong, but then, with my heart in my throat, I was grasping for other files. Eli Evermore. Sex, male. Date of birth, 08-03-1979. Rowan? I managed to get out through a breath. They're not children. The boy rubbed his eyes, frowning. His eyes were half-lidded, almost confused. Huh? Eleanor, I whispered, is 45 years old. He nodded slowly, turning back to the laptop. How do you spell documents? I'm looking for digital versions, but I can't find any. You don't know how to spell documents? It's been a hard day. The boy whined, tipping his head back and blowing a raspberry. Whatever I was going to say was choked in the back of my throat, when a loud bang sounded from above, the sounds of childish giggling coming through the floorboards, but the laughter didn't sound like little kids. No, it sounded like teenagers who were acting like little kids. I stared at the boxes of animal crackers, and then at the file confirming Eleanor's real age. My own words shuddered through me, and I remembered finding Teddy's dismembered carcass in Cassie's cabin. When I had caught her gaze, the little girl didn't look scared, and somehow her fingers wrapped around the scalpel looked just right, like the little bitch knew exactly what she was doing. Hello? Harry's voice was a hysterical giggle. Ollie Ollie Oxenfree. Are you here? Carmel joined in. I could hear their footsteps above, dancing across the room. Clamping my hand over my mouth, I dragged my knees to my chest and prayed they weren't smart enough to figure out we were right underneath them. Knowing the truth about them, though, I wasn't counting on it. That was an hour ago. We're still stuck down here and I can't get a connection here, thank God. For some reason, Allison has blocked all social media. We need help. We're at Camp Redwood and these kids are not kids. Whatever Project Spearhead is, was designed to keep them here. The phone line is cut so we can't get help from whoever was helping Allison. I'm counting on you guys. Get us out of here. Welcome to Camp Redwood, the feel-good camp for all ages. We toast marshmallows around the fire, tell spooky ghost stories, and hide in random secret military bunkers under the campgrounds, because something is here with us. Camp Redwood is the perfect place for a summer getaway where we start every day with a Camp Redwood smile, where our counselors disappear every 5 minutes and our campers disembowel us for funsies. Did I forget to mention our littles aren't actually 8 years old but fully grown adults? We hope you enjoy your damn stay. We are also not responsible for any counselors revealing they are not who they said they are and are not who they appear to be. So, there's a lot to tell you and not a lot of time to tell it. Right now, I suppose you could say we are under lockdown, if that is the word. I want to go over the last several days to get you up to date. That's all I can do right now. I can hope and pray the thing with Teddy's voice does not get in here, and once again cry out for help that I know is not coming. Not from the authorities, at least. But hey, if any of you fancy coming to rescue us, we're in the middle of the Canadian wilderness. The closest rest stop is maybe 3 damn hours away, so have fun. Has it really been almost a week since I posted? Well, we're still here. And surprise, surprise, help is not coming, so please excuse the salt. I am 17 years old and I have been abandoned by the adults who are supposed to be looking after us. Who were supposed to act under protocol if something like this happened. I know they were waiting for it. There are specific guidelines on an emergency evacuation for counselors if this ever happened. But then the little craps took over before we could do anything. I guess I'll start by letting you know that there are 2 of us left. 3 if we count Rowan, but I'm not. What I thought was going to be a quiet summer getaway with kids my age has turned into a nightmare. For one, we have been cornered inside the head counselor's underground secret bunker. If you want to know why she has a secret military bunker, I guess you should keep listening. Because it gets weirder than animal crackers having the power to turn adults into kids and vice versa. When I made my first post, I thought that was it for us. I thought for sure there must have been a self-destruct somewhere, which meant whoever was running this camp was waiting for something like this to happen. I was sure we were going to die, so after making the post, I have to admit with y'all, I just slept. I curled up, tried to ignore Harry and Carmel calling out our names through childish laughter. I went to sleep with the thought in my head that I was completely at peace with what I had done with my life. Sure, I was young. 17 years old is too young to be ripped apart by littles who are, in fact, grown adults. But as I was falling into slumber and allowing myself to fall, with my head resting in my lap, my head turned towards a separate pile of files on the other side of the room. I realized I really wanted to know how this was possible. There was so much I needed to know. Why did 8-year-old Eleanor Summers have a file where her birthday dated back to 1979? Why had supposedly innocent sugary snacks turned our adorable littles into mini psychopaths? These kids were not kids somehow. But how? How is that even possible? Could it be that the files were wrong? 1979 was definitely 45. But Eleanor Summers couldn't be 45 years old. I knew what 45 looked like. I knew that they thought like. They spent half of their time on Facebook laughing at outdated memes, and the other half, I don't know, working. They have jobs. They're happily married with kids, maybe soon grandkids. That was not Eleanor Summers, because Eleanor Summers was most definitely 8 years old. I had played several rounds of Teddy Bear's Picnic and spent hours reassuring her that Harry's ghost stories were in fact not real. Enough times for me to know that this little kid was little and a kid. But something was bothering me. More than the secret military bunker and magic age-regressing animal crackers. When I first signed up to Camp Redwood, one of the taglines to gain attraction had been, "Solve mysteries in the woods in the dead of night, with nothing but a flashlight and your fellow campers." I had no idea I would be solving this thing on my own, trapped inside a bunker. "What are you doing?" Rowan, who was still looking through Allison's dinosaur laptop, turned to me with half-lidded eyes. When I slowly got to my feet, careful not to make too much noise, and crept over to the pile of separate files which seemed to be crumbling apart from age. He kept his voice low, but it sounded almost like a whine. He could have been scared, but from the way he was sitting cross-legged with a frowny face, I figured something must have been going on with him. The guy looked tired, more tired than normal. The bags under his eyes were practically shadowing his face, and were an odd contrast to unusually ashy-colored cheeks and slightly dilated eyes. Still, though, Rowan refused to look vulnerable. I caught a glimpse of Harry's Ray-Bans sitting on his head, pinning back thick dark brown curls from falling in front of sleepy eyes. Maybe he was finally losing his cool and breaking out of the well-constructed facade he'd been hiding behind since Teddy's disappearance. We had just narrowly escaped a crowd of psycho littles high on age-regressing sugary snacks who were doing the who the hell knows to the other counselors who had been captured, so I didn't blame him for looking like that. I guess he couldn't look me in the eyes because in Rowan's mind, he was the reason why this happened. He was the leader, and the camp had fallen to psychopathic little 8-year-olds who had taken half of the counselors hostage, and the other half, most likely taken apart in the physical sense. After what we had witnessed in Cassie's cabin, still though, it wasn't Rowan's fault. He could sit there and pull a face all he wanted. It's not like I was going to blow up at him for getting us stuck down here. He actually saved us. And trapped us, judging from the footsteps upstairs. Carmel and Harry still bouncing around looking for us. It was a game in their heads. The littles thought it was cat and mouse. Harry and Carmel were the oblivious cats prowling while we were the mice, hoping to God we weren't caught and eaten. Ignoring Rowan, I glimpsed what looked like a box full of DVDs, all of which were labeled with dates and names. I saw familiar ones, my heart racing into my throat. Phoebe, Eli, Cassandra. Each DVD had one of the kids' names scribbled on the front, as well as a date. I found Eleanor's right at the back of the box. Eleanor Summers. 08/05/2021 p.m. Before I could hesitate and think what I was doing, I slid the DVD into the portable player attached to the MacBook. Rowan, to my surprise, didn't move, but he did make an acknowledging noise when the screen flickered to what looked like video footage. Peering at the screen, I found myself staring at a small white room. There was no door, only a wooden desk and a chair, and sitting on it was a middle-aged woman with dark blonde curls tied into a strict ponytail. She was wearing what looked like a prison jumpsuit. Her eyes were eerily glued to the camera, unblinking. Her wrists were cuffed in front of her. Though, from the look on her face, she saw the restraints as a game. Her eyes lit up with intrigue, and I could practically see the cogs in her mind starting to turn as she struggled with them. As soon as I saw this woman, I felt all of my nerve endings set alight. I wanted to turn the screen off or look away, but once I was looking at the screen, I couldn't bring myself to tear my eyes away. Let's try this again. There was a woman off screen. She sounded young, too young to be in that kind of authority. I figured there was no way teenagers were being hired as special ops agents, but I guessed I was wrong. She cleared her throat. It is 4:35 exactly, August 5th, 2021. My name is Agent Lemrak, she stated. I'm asking once again for you to comply with us. As I have said several times, the court are willing to listen to your sentence if you plead guilty with insanity. The woman surprised me with a snorting laugh. She seemed to come alive, leaning forward with animated features, her brow reaching her hairline. She was acting like a child, bouncing up and down in the seat, her lips stretching into a wider grin. What did you just say? There was a pause. I could tell the woman was intentionally antagonizing the interviewer. It means you have been legally declared insane. The interviewer stumbled over her words slightly. Mrs. Summers, it would be in your best interest to work with us to lessen your current sentence, which at the moment is standing at... The sounds of shuffling paper crackled through the speakers. The interviewer cleared her throat again, rustling paper. 36 years, without parole. The woman didn't speak, only continued to smile, and the interviewer delved further into the sentence. If you do in fact plead guilty with declared insanity, you will be sentenced to a program which is in the process of supporting and rehabilitating people with your... She caught herself for a moment. I could tell this interviewer had a biased opinion, and it was definitely showing through her interviewing style. I could hear the rapid intakes of her breath as she hurried through what seemed to be a script she was reading from. Conditions, she finished. The Redwood program aims to help people exactly like you. Redwood, I thought. Like Camp Redwood? Rowan whistled behind me. I guess I could call that a reaction. The guy was probably still in shock after seeing Cafe de Teddy splattered all over little Cassie's cabin floor. I should have known those little bitches weren't playing Operation for 8 hours straight. Turning my attention from Rowan and back to the screen, the woman in the jumpsuit appeared to have changed tactics. Her expression twisted into nonchalance. She leaned back in her chair. I'm not pleading insane. Because I'm not insane. Mrs. Summers. The woman cut her off. I'm not crazy. She raised her hands. I'm doing what needs to be done. She leaned forward. Humanity suffers in the skin. We age and die in how far? How is that fair? What if we want to see the next millennium? And the next 2 millennia after that, why should our bodies dictate our lifespan? Why should we sit here and wait to rot and wither and die when we have the intelligence and mindset to do it? If nobody else is willing to throw ethics aside to take a step forward in human evolution, I should do it myself. She folded her arms across her chest again like a child. I did what was to be done. Dr. Summers. The interviewer's tone grew stiff. You and your colleagues conducted illegal and unethical procedures on your family and friends, as well as 4 other victims. The woman inclined her head. You have a daughter. Am I correct? I have a son. A child you killed, Dr. Summers. The interviewer retorted in a hiss which was definitely expressing emotion. She ignored the mention of her daughter, but I could tell it had rattled her to her core. Her voice had cracked. This case was close to her. That was obvious. Without seeing the interviewer herself, I could sense how uncomfortable she was. Shuffling in the chair every so often, I could hear the sound of her rubbing her hands on her knees and tapping her shoe against the chair leg. She oozed anxiety, not just from her tone of voice, but the way the frame seemed to move with her. Dr. Summers, you used your son in your research, along with several of his friends. This was not science. Her voice shook. I heard her sharp inhale, unprofessional but very human. Instead of staying stoic and keeping to script, this agent was cracking apart. It was murder. Agent Lemrak, concentrate on their interview only. An official voice crackled through what sounded like an intercom on screen. Got it, she spoke through her teeth. The woman was finding wounds and pressing on them. She was scanning the interviewer for vulnerabilities and preying on every insecurity. She leaned back, speaking through a sigh. Without my son's sacrifice, we wouldn't have created an answer to death, to growing old and dying and leaving loved ones behind. Her voice softened into a murmur, but I didn't trust it. After identifying the shattering pieces of this interviewer, which were very clearly visible in her view, the woman was taking advantage. Agent Lemrak, you have a daughter. Am I correct in saying her name is Mari? That is not relevant. Glioblastoma. Dr. Summers' lips curved into a sickening smile, hidden behind mocking sympathy. A sickness of the brain which, unfortunately, I cannot fix. If your daughter's brain was in my hands, I would try. However, not even a brand new body would help her. One which would never age or grow sick. And for that, I am deeply, deeply sorry. She reached her cuffed hands forwards. My condolences, Agent Lemrak. Honestly, I have to hand it to you. You are incredibly brave for coming here today and talking to me while abandoning your sick child. She shook her head. Your daughter's dying of an incurable illness, suffering inside fragile skin which will break and fall apart and be unable to keep her standing for much longer. Well, my son will live on forever. He will see every millennia, a planet which will crumble and build itself back together, and maybe the end of the universe itself. There was a twitch in her expression and a glitter in her eye I did not recognize. Insanity. She was purely insane. I was seeing the pure of it. The depraved and disgusting gleam in eyes, empty of remorse and regret. The woman did not care what she had done. I could tell from the look on her face. If she had the chance, she would do this again. But there was no way they were trying to say her cruelty and complete disregard for her son's life was due to insanity. You are sick, Dr. Summers, the interviewer said after a moment of gathering herself. The woman shook her head with a chuckle. I told you, I'm not sick. Sick in the head. The interviewer's voice exploded through the speakers in a shriek, a terrified cry she had been trying to hold in. I finally saw her, or at least the back of her. She was a young woman with light blonde hair falling loose on her shoulders. She was trembling. Slamming her hands down on the table, she screamed at the orange jumpsuit woman. You are psychologically messed up in the head. You psycho bitch, that is my sister! She spoke through strangled sobs rattling her whole body. Mari is my little sister. She is not my child. Her breaths were strangled and harbored. I noticed figures looming in the background, but she was continuing. You killed your own son, she spat. You are not legally insane. You are sick, she shrieked. You planned and put this together. You sit there and talk about your son like he's a tool. You deserve to rot. Do you hear me? I noticed the orange jumpsuit woman was still smiling, satisfied with the interviewer's reaction. Her words were spoken in a vicious poison as she leaned forward and spat directly in orange jumpsuit's face. Agent Lemrak. Whoever her superiors were panicking. I told you not to turn it off. I knew this was going to happen. Can we stop the demonstration, please? Human emotions present inside an Aceville soldier are too powerful. Voices were murmuring in the background, and Agent Lemrak raised her hands. I want to stop, she choked out, her hands trembling. She spoke like she still had control over the situation and wasn't being apprehended. I want to stop. Do you hear me? The interviewer was crying, I realized. Stop the recording. I can't do this. Oh God, I think I'm going to be sick. When the footage ended in a burst of static, I found myself backing away, something slimy creeping its way up my throat. The woman in the orange jumpsuit, who had murdered her son and countless others in what sounded like an attempt at playing God, was Eleanor Summers. I thought back to Teddy's corpse and the surgical precision of every organ's removal. The young interviewer had mentioned colleagues of Eleanor. Was it possible that Camp Redwood was in fact nothing more than a rehabilitation camp for murderous criminals? There was a loud bang from above, and I was torn from my thoughts. I turned to Rowan, who had been unusually quiet, and I realized why. When I twisted around to find him 3 inches from my face, his labored breath tickling my cheek. The boy jumped back with a chuckle, like me noticing him with some kind of game, before diving back into the chair. I did notice something odd, as my thoughts spiraled. Rowan couldn't sit still. Slumped in the leather spinning chair, his fingers tapped rhythm on the armrests while his feet jumped up and down. In the dim light of the bunker, I glimpsed a sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead and the flesh of his neck. He looked to be feverish, and now that I was looking at him properly, all of my attention on the boy, I noticed small things which seemed off about him. For one, he wasn't coming up with a plan. Rowan always had a plan, even if he wasn't completely sure of it or was completely winging it. This time, though, he was strangely quiet. I found my voice when he stuck out his tongue at me. What are you looking at? Rowan, I spoke softly, careful not to garner attention from above us, where Harry and Carmel were still clamoring around, playing games. Are you feeling okay? I asked, when he turned back to the laptop, manically biting his fingernails. I don't know, Josie. Am I feeling okay? He surprised me with an uncharacteristic laugh, but I didn't know it. I knew it from earlier when he reacted to Allison's bunker, and I'd been too freaked out to realize that I was dragging along the enemy with me. Because the idiot had consumed animal crackers, I had seen him for myself earlier, pouring a pack into his mouth for a snack, which meant either the kids had intentionally dosed him with mind-altering sugary snacks, or the more likely, he could not resist those preservatives, which was the equivalent of caffeine. It's not like I could blame him when he harbored the weight of an entire camp, but come on, did he really have to sacrifice his own mind to keep himself awake? Rowan wasn't just biting his nails, he was gnawing, which he previously thought was a filthy habit. He had yelled at a camper for chewing on her nails a few days earlier. Now that I was noticing it, I couldn't stop noticing it. The boy's whole demeanor had changed, the way he was sinking into his chair instead of sitting up straight like usual. I used to call it having a stick up his ass. The boy started typing on the laptop, ignoring me, but when I watched the pattern of his fingers, he was just typing gibberish. Footsteps pounded above us, and Harry and Carmel acting as the kids' brainwashed foot soldiers. Or, more likely somehow, if the animal crackers had caused the littles, or I guess, the fully grown 40-year-old criminals to relapse in age, then maybe it was possible for the same thing to happen to us, to Rowan. I could feel myself starting to back away, but there was nowhere to run. I just slammed into a cupboard. My gaze flicked to Rowan again, who was tapping a beat on the laptop tracking pad, swaying back and forth. his eyes elsewhere before his gaze found mine. "Marco!" Harry shouted from above, giggling with Carmel. I had to guess their mental age had to be at least 8 to 10 years old, which meant I wasn't just dealing with a camp full of 40-year-old psychos. I was also dealing with mentally relapsed counselors acting like toddlers. Rowan seemed to jolt in the chair, twisting his head around, his eyes suddenly incredibly childlike and playful, and very un-Rowan. We're finding the ceiling. His mouth stretching into a smile like he was seeing butterflies. His eyes flashed to me, and I caught a twitch in his lip. I knew that look. It was the look on my 7-year-old sister who knew Mom was mad at me and wanted to make it even worse. His cheeks were starting to blossom scarlet from what must have been the overwhelming urge to laugh. Rowan pressed his lips together and held in a breath like a hamster, and the guy was messing with me, waiting for me to beat him to it by accident. Kids were ruthless. But there was something terrifying about an 18-year-old with a little kid's mind. I lifted my index to my lips, miming for him to not even try, but the boy just mimicked me, bugging out his eyes and pressing his finger to his grinning mouth. "Don't you dare," I managed to whisper. The boy was definitely playing his own game, moving in twitching movements, baiting me. When he cupped his mouth, I almost let out a cry, but then he dropped his arms with a giggle as if to say, "I'm just kidding." Slowly, I turned around, grabbed the salt I'd found in Allison's cupboard and a flat can of soda. Without making too much movement, I poured a handful of salt into the can, but Rowan seemed to know exactly what I was doing, because in the time it was taking me to advance towards him with a can of salty soda, one arm shakily ready to grab hold of him and put him into a headlock, he was cupping his mouth, all logic and everything adult, everything he had been as our leader, igniting in playful eyes, leaving me the last one standing. "Polo!" By the time Rowan had managed to reveal our hiding place in a spluttered laugh, I had hold of the squirming boy, one arm wrapped around his neck, my other forcing the can of soda into his mouth. I had definitely miscalculated his strength. During Camp Redwood activities, he was always the last one to come back from the trail, holding his knees and panting. I figured he was unfit. However, I was wrong. Underneath his shirt, the guy had some serious muscles. It was like attacking a brick wall. However, Rowan was mentally a kid, so I had my intelligence and logic on my side. When it became obvious I wasn't going to get anywhere with brute strength, I resorted to tickling him, which made him squirm, squeaking out a laugh, which he opened his mouth to yell at me to stop. I took my chance, thrusting the can into his lips and holding his nose so he swallowed it down. "No!" His laughter turned into muffled yelling, as he batted his fists at my chest. "No, no, no, get off! Get off!" His body convulsed as the salt did its job, causing the boy to lurch to his knees and choke up forbidden animal crackers in a gooish sludge which turned my stomach. By the time Rowan seemed half himself and half not, still kneeling, his head pressed against the floor, Harry was poking his head through the door with a goonish grin. "Found you," he giggled, before forcing the door open, allowing Carmel and Kaylin, freshly caught and mentally turned into littles, to advance down the stairs with equally terrifying grins. There was something wrong with Harry's face, and I only realized it when the guy himself was hauling me from the bunker. Carmel dragging a barely responsive Rowan. There was nothing in Harry's expression, only blind, childish excitement at winning the game. When he dragged me out of Allison's cabin and threw me to the ground, I realized he too had insane strength I had not been expecting. But that thought quickly retracted when I was seeing his face in the light of a crescent moon, lighting up the sky in eerie glow. Harry's cheeks were puffy and swollen. His right eye was bigger than it should have been. When he spoke, his voice was more of a lisp. This was something far more realistic than magical animal crackers messing with his brain. "He needs help," I managed to choke out when Carmel wrapped jump rope around my wrists. Next to me, Rowan was refusing to get up, still choking up salty soda, groaning into his hands. Every time Kaylin tried to restrain him, he hissed out like an animal. "Do you hear me?" I struggled violently. "Harry needs—" Bang, is what it felt like. The feeling of something, what felt and sounded like a toy car colliding with my temples, sent me onto the ground, my head spinning itself off of its axis. I remember lying on my back and frowning at the moon, which almost looked like it was getting closer to me. blurring into a white ball of light, before reality sunk in, and it was, in fact, Carmel's Converse coming down to finish me off. I didn't stay knocked out for long, but I did dream. I think you can call it a dream. I was lying in bed at home, my room drowned in the dark. I was cozy, curled up in my blankets, when a clammy hand slammed over my mouth, rousing me from slumber. There were two figures in my room. They didn't have faces. They just existed as shadows, silhouettes. Before one of them raised something above their head, and impact. It was the same impact as the toy car hitting me, snapping me back to that night. It wasn't a dream, because I remembered his clammy fingers over my mouth, and his hisses for me to shut up as he dragged me from my room. My parents stood in front of me with expressions of sympathy, basked in warm light. My mom and dad looked almost otherworldly. For the best, was what they mouthed when my own phantom screams slammed into me. I asked them why, and they didn't reply, allowing him to pull me further and further from what I knew, from my life as I knew it. But that couldn't be real. I had memories of getting on the bus to Camp Redwood. I would recall the whole journey, so why? Why was my tangled mind saying otherwise? When I gathered myself, the first thing I realized was I was sitting down. I was outside, cool night air grazing my bare arms. There was something attached to me, jerking violently, and it took me several disorienting blinks to understand that I was tied back to back with Rowan. My head pounded, and something wet and warm dripped down my temple. Great. I could add head injury to the long list of things to worry about. Let me go, you little witch. Rowan was back to himself, though from the muffled hissing and the sound of choking, I had to guess he was being force-fed animal crackers. Let me, little damn. Rowan, I managed to get out in a croak. Through flickering eyes, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure dancing around us. Shivers rocketed down my spine, and I wrenched at the jump rope restraints, but they did a surprisingly good job of restraining my arms behind my back. Eleanor was with Rowan, while Eli was knelt in front of me. Looking at him, the boy had definitely aged in the face, and I couldn't help wondering what exactly he had done as a 40-something-year-old to be sent to this place. Josie, Rowan responded in a wail. Josie, wake the hell up! Stop swearing. Eleanor spoke with the cold tone of her actual age. Oh yeah? Rowan spluttered. To hell with you! The boy's laugh was still rough from almost vomiting his insides out from too much salt intake. I'm sorry, you were a damn boomer all along. He wriggled in his restraints, lunging forwards, which sent me backwards. Stop swearing, Rowan, was all the girl responded with calmly. Like I'm going to listen to you, he sneered. Hell. What are you going to do, huh? Bite me with your false teeth? The sound of saliva hitting skin made me wince. He was pissed. I had no doubt his completely rational anger was going to get us killed. Rowan was also somehow getting mixed up between 40 and 80, though he was unwillingly snacking on mind-bending sugary goodness. Fudge, Rowan, Eleanor spoke in a giggle. What? Say fudge. No! His hiss of pain caught me off guard. I don't know what she was doing to him, but it was hurting him. You fudging fudge! I'm going to fudge and kill you when I get out of these fudging ropes! His manic cursing became a muffled yell. Say fudge, Eleanor hummed, followed by his hiss when the palm of her hand skinned his cheek. That is a bad word. You even said so yourself, and you're my favorite counselor. He heaved out of breath. You fudge, Rowan spat. When I get out of this, I'm going to fudge and kill you, you fudging. His manic ranting morphed, once again into muffled yelling, after another fistful of animal crackers were forced into his mouth. When I risked twisting around, I could see his rebellion slowly starting to simmer out as he relaxed slightly. I wanted to yell at him to keep a clear head before cold fingers were dipping under my chin and forcing my head around where I found myself face to face with Eli. I like you, Josie, he said, before untying me and pulling me to my feet. Now at the age of 9 or 10, he was a lot stronger. When I tried to pull away, the cruel blade of a knife grazed my gut. I caught his grin. But we don't need you. Eli pointed to Rowan. We just want them. I followed his pointer finger, which went from Rowan to Harry and Carmel, who were just standing there like idiots, probably awaiting the next game. Harry's face was getting redder. It looked like he was suffocating, and yet his grin was growing wider and wider, splitting his lips apart. "Rowan Atlas," Eleanor said, dragging him to his feet. Something was stapled on his forehead, which caused him to howl in pain. Hissing another strangled line of fudge, but I couldn't read what it was. "Camp leader, intelligent and problem-solving skills." Harry Carlyle. Eli nodded his head with a smile. "Quick thinker, strong-minded." "Carmel Locke." Cassie spoke behind me. She had her arms folded, a wry smile on her lips. "Smarter than she makes out, an independent learner, and can work well under pressure." Looking at these kids, I felt sick to my stomach. They were planning something, and had the intelligence of renowned scientists, which was what I gathered from the footage on the MacBook. "What?" was all I could hiss out, as Eli prodded the blade of the knife into my back, ushering me to walk. "What are you talking about?" "Duh," he spoke in a more tweeny giggle. "Like I said, Miss Jonesy, you're my favorite counselor, but we don't need you, so I'm going to use you for parts." He laughed when a shiver spiderwebbed down my spine. "See? I told you I was going to show you my collection." But what do you need them for?" Eli pressed his finger to his lips with a laugh before forcing me to face forwards. "That's a secret." When I didn't or couldn't move, he shoved me into a stumbling power walk, and I managed to turn my head quickly, making feverish eye contact with Rowan. "Rowan," I said calmly through the gutter in my throat. "Get help." If I was going to die, I needed him to get a hold of himself and somehow alert the outside world what was going on. "From whom, Josie?" he wailed back, and as I was dragged away, I could once again sense the childish undertones in his voice. I had no choice but to obey Eli's orders, if I didn't want a knife in my back. He took me to the main lunch cabin, which, when I set foot inside, almost sent me to my knees. Something lurched inside me, and I was screaming with no voice, staggering backwards, only to be shoved onto my face. In front of me was what had been the lunch hall, fully converted into the beginning of a laboratory. What had been cafeteria tables were fashioned into makeshift gurneys and beds, and I was looking at all of the missing counselors. Yuri and Noah had been skinned completely, their faces laid out on a makeshift surgical table. Joey had been ripped open, his heart and brain removed, a glittering metallic substance creeping its way across his forehead. It was then when I remembered Eleanor Summers' words. She wanted to prevent death and preserve the human mind. Looking at what was in front of me, this was the start of it. There was equipment I had never seen before. Lily's body was empty, carved out completely, tubes forced inside her. When I glimpsed her fingers move and begin to ball into a fist, I saw red. The exit was so close, and yet damn Eli, wielded his knife. I think that is when part of me gave up. My brain just stopped. It short-circuited. Seeing my friends murdered and yet somehow being kept alive through playing God, my body slumped to the ground. I was numb. Completely numb. I'm not sure what would have happened if those bloody saws and instruments which had been used on my friends were used on me too. Luckily, that did not happen. Before Eli could get his slimy hands on me, he crumpled to the ground in an almost cartoon-like fashion, and standing over me was Harry, who was looking better, when he grasped hold of me and helped me up. I only had one word, out, and he was nodding, his eyes glistening as he drunk in our friend's fate. "How?" I managed to sputter out. When he made it out of the cabin, ducking behind a tree, Harry turned to me, motioning for me to shut up. There was a group of now 10 to 11-year-olds already running around, searching for what I guessed was him. "I'm allergic to peanut butter," Harry murmured, his grasp tightening on my wrist as he led me across the camp, the two of us stumbling. "What? And you just magically healed?" He didn't respond to that, which bothered me. "The bunker's our best shot," I hissed out. "I think we can get in contact with someone down there." I paused, unable to stop myself. "What makes you so important?" "Dunno. Maybe I'm their favorite?" When we found Allison's cabin, which was more of a safe house, an exposed safe house, I found Rowan sitting on the wooden porch with his legs swinging over the side. "Rowan!" Harry groaned. I found it hard to believe their roles had been switched. Now he was the one yelling at the camp leader. "I told you to stay inside." He ushered the boy inside, before barricading the door with some hefty-looking equipment. I could tell from the grin on his face that our so-called leader was once again no longer himself. I had to bite back a groan. "You're kidding," I said, pointing to Rowan, who buried his head in his knees and blew a raspberry. "Does he look and act like our leader now?" "It's Rowan, Josie. He's a liability. He's our friend. Wouldn't Rowan do the same?" "Yes, he would, but he would also realize we were a lost cause." "Gag him with something," I said. "If he makes any more noise, we're dumping him. He's a kid. Just the mind of one." I don't know how animal crackers worked, but this age seemed to be progressively younger. This time he just sat with wide eyes watching us. Harry almost tore apart the place looking for means of communication, before an old-fashioned ringing sound made me jump. "What was that?" Harry turned to me with his lip curled. "How am I supposed to know?" I hissed. "Keep looking." But when I ducked under the table, my hands crawled under the desk, finding a wire, and attached to that an ancient-looking phone which looked straight out of the 1940s movie, a bright green rotary phone. Hesitantly, I answered it, lifting the phone to my ear. "Hello? Did you awaken the subjects, Agent Salta?" The voice on the other end was a woman, an oldish-sounding woman with the tinge of a British accent. "What?" I shot a look at Harry before shaking my head. "No, my name is Josie Greenfield. We're at Camp Redwood and we need help." The woman paused. "Where's Agent Salta?" She cleared her throat. "This line is reserved for communication with agents only." "I don't know who the hell you're talking about," I squeaked out. "My name is Josie, and whatever is happening here, we need help." "Josie, did you awaken the subjects?" I paused after a moment, shooting Harry a look when he tried to take the phone off of me. "Yes." "And our agents are unavailable?" "I don't understand." "When a health and safety breach is activated, our agents are awakened to deal with the project's spearhead subjects, if they were to ever go rogue, or become conscious enough to think." "Josie, can you tell me what is in front of you? Describe it to me." I held my breath. Next to the hidden phone under the desk was what looked like mismatched wires, all of which had been severed. I lowered myself slowly, poking at a mess. "Wires? I see cut-up wires," I whispered. "Does this mean they know about you?" She hummed. That makes sense. The only way to activate our sleeper handlers would be to send out the signal. You appear to have been sabotaged. Unless activated manually, our agents cannot help you. I am sorry. They are your problem now." The woman paused. "If I were you, I would hope and pray they have not sabotaged the self-destruct. If you find that, then you may be able to save yourselves and find peace." She cleared her throat. "Thank you for your service, Josie Greenfield." "Wait!" I managed to get out. "Wait! No! You can't just leave us! We need help!" I found myself yelling at nothing when the phone went dead. The dull tone of the dead ringtone was clanging in my ears before footsteps from up above. "Screw this!" Harry picked up a lead pipe. "They're still little kids, right? I mean, their head must be partly kids. So let's beat their damn heads in." He noticed something then. Starting forwards towards the mess of files I had left earlier, Harry knelt on the ground and picked up Eli's file, his eyes wide. But he wasn't staring at the dates confirming the little boy's age. Instead, Harry pointed at the bottom of the file. "I don't want to freak you out, Josie," he whispered. Initially, I didn't know what he was trying to show before I glimpsed notes scrawled at the bottom of the file, followed by a signature. "But I'm pretty sure that this is my writing." Harry was right. I pulled the paperwork off of him, flicking through each file before turning my eyes to him. "Who the hell are you?" A clanging sound from above broke the tension, and whatever Harry was about to reply with was strangled in his throat. He slammed a hand over his mouth. "Guys?" The voice twisted me up inside, threatening to release a shriek from my mouth I had managed to clamp shut. "Teddy, are you down here?" His voice was strained and had an odd tone to it. I can't see you." "Can someone please tell me what the hell is going on? It's been a blur of a week, and we've managed to stay down here, surviving off of Allison's rations. Rowan isn't getting any better. He seems to have stopped mentally de-aging at the age of maybe 6. Harry has spent the last few days trying to get in contact with anyone, but it's like they are ignoring us. I've been looking through everything I can find on Project Spearhead, but nothing points to Harry being involved, so how is his signature all over the files? How is it possible that 2 friends I thought I knew several days ago are now complete strangers? Teddy keeps coming back. He's crying out to us. I think he's in pain. My God, I can't stand this anymore. Please, Camp Redwood needs help. Welcome to Camp Redwood. Are you ready to fight to the death with age-regressed 40-year-olds with the faces of adorable little kids? How about coming to terms with your entire life, or at least 5 years of it being one big lie? We are so excited to announce our 2018 group, where you will undoubtedly find yourself here, your true self, the self you did not know existed. So, jump in that military bunker, grab that blunt object to fight against our little campers, disemboweling our counselors, and get yourself down to Camp Redwood, where we start every day with a Camp Redwood smile. Apply now. Application end date 05/02/2018. It's been a tough few days, so I think I will be posting this update in 2 chunks, so I can get everything down and clear in my head. I'm alone right now. Yes, I am the last survivor of Camp Redwood 2023. I've been unsure how to start this and end this because I really just want to get into the meat of what has been going on. But I must ask, I have to. What year is it? That doesn't matter right now. I'll continue where I left off. Teddy did leave us alone in the end, but his screams were still haunting me hours after the thing with his voice had left. I don't even think I could call it his voice. It sounded like him, but there were pieces of him missing, like someone had reached into the boy's mind and pulled out the skeleton of his consciousness, the bare bones of his being, and cruelly stuffed him into a metal shell. This is what Teddy sounded like. He sounded like a wounded animal, confused why he was alive, terrified. I now know what he is the product of. Teddy is a victim of horrifying, unethical experiments our campers have been forcing on kidnapped counselors after taking over the camp. Have you ever heard of this sound of crying which isn't human? That is Teddy. He is the product of forcing life into the dead and leaving it to suffer with its consequences, which in my opinion is a fate worse than death. You're probably wondering where my 2 companions are. Well, that is why I'm writing this. I want to tell you what happened so I can wrap my head around it myself and choose between killing all of us and sending these psychopaths to hell, or coming to terms with our truth and fighting back. Well, it's their truth. I wouldn't say it's mine. It took us 3 whole days to get the guts to risk leaving Allison's secret bunker inside her cabin and attempting to find a way out of this hellhole. Harry and I were the ones to do it, leaving a still not completely himself Rowan to guard our safe house. I didn't want to leave him alone for a multitude of reasons, but due to Harry actually having a soul and a semblance of empathy, I was overruled. Despite being heavily under the influence of age-regressing animal crackers, which had mentally turned him into a toddler, Rowan was still himself to a degree, which meant he was back to being our leader. I was skeptical at first, because no matter how many times he insisted he was in fact okay, I couldn't seem to shake off the feeling that the childish parts of him, the warped parts of his mind which had turned him into a child, were still there. Even if they were very subtle. I caught him doodling on his clipboard, and much later on singing to himself with an odd smile on his face he had successfully gaslit Harry and I into believing it was just a coping mechanism. Say what you want about Rowan Atlas. He is damn good at swaying your opinion. Even when we were 100% sure Rowan was not his original self, the guy we had both met at the start of camp. It was almost like him having 2 minds, the mind of a child and the mind of a teenager. For example, he still ordered us around and attempted to take back his role as leader, which had at least secured some normality back into our lives. But he also hated loud noises and freaked out every time one of the littles tried to get in. There was also the incident we had agreed not to talk about because talking about it meant facing the fact that our friend was no longer himself. It was hours after Teddy left us in peace. Harry was sleeping and I was on the cusp of slumber, slipping through more files. Rowan had been oddly quiet, which wasn't a Rowan thing. Whether he was mentally a child or a teenager, he was still being loud and obnoxious. I sat up to find him cross-legged, playing with something. I thought it was a worm at first, but no, it was exactly like what I found at the start of this, an eye attached to a nerve. But this time it was undoubtedly human and now Rowan's plaything. When I questioned him, he said he was studying it, though there was definitely a difference between studying something and playing with it. The scary thing was, he saw no wrong in it, holding it in his hands and slipping off the metallic pieces cruelly attached to it. In the end, I took it from him and stamped on it. Rowan didn't have the reaction I was expecting, because he was still hiding behind the facade that his mind hadn't been warped by de-aging animal crackers. If that wasn't bad enough, Eleanor Summers had given me a 24-hour deadline to hand over the boys, and we were well over the limit, so an ambush was likely imminent. I still had so many questions. Why were Rowan, Harry, and Carmel so important while the rest of us was seen as nothing but spare parts? That is what the little bitch said. Now physically 11 years old with the mind of a deranged 40-year-old scientist, Eleanor told me I was nothing to them but spare parts. God, it's so weird calling her what she is, after looking after her kid self, or fake self, for weeks. Little Eleanor, with her golden pigtails and obsession with teddy bear picnics, was in fact a complete sociopath. That much of one, in fact, that her and her equally psychotic colleagues who engaged in these experiments had been regressed into little kids inside a rehabilitation camp nicknamed Project Spearhead, which was supposed to fix them and had failed spectacularly, because they've taken over, and this time, we're the damn lab rats. The counselors here at Redwood. I had seen her adult self being interviewed by mysterious Agent Lemrak, a face behind Project Spearhead, the girl who was far too young to be an agent and have that kind of authority, also someone with a soul, who had a clear biased opinion against the experiments. Part of me wondered if Lemrak still existed. Maybe she was behind the odd phone calls we kept receiving on an old-fashioned rotary phone. With Eleanor's deadline in mind, the two of us made our journey quick. It wasn't hard to leave the camp itself. There were guards in the form of Kaylin and Olive, brainwashed and turned into the kids' muscle, but they were easy enough to get past as long as we distracted them with something shiny. They were mentally 6 years old, so literally anything grabbed their attention. I quickly realized my mistake once we managed to escape the camp. Harry in front of me with me lagging behind. We moved slowly, ducking behind trees and throwing ourselves into the dirt. Very cloak and dagger. It didn't take us long to slip into the woods. Just past the lake were the exit gates to Redwood, which led to a road. Not exactly civilization, but I would take it over having my body taken apart for parts in these so-called experiments. When we got to the gate, however, I realized I had given the adults too much credit. Whoever was in charge of Spearhead clearly did not care about lingering visitors, as long as they were successfully cutting us out from the outside world. And that's what the giant wall I found myself staring at was, an impossible foot monster towering over us and cementing my earlier thoughts. We were screwed. The woman on the phone had made it clear we were being abandoned, and yet some of me naively held on to them, maybe still rescuing us. Hell, I didn't know what to do, but kicking the damn thing felt like the right thing. I did, and then regretted it half a second later. This thing was impenetrable, impossible to climb unless we had a damn death wish. Blinking at it through Frank's sunlight blinding me, the thing almost resembled a mirage. It stood under the sun, a giant roadblock completely blocking us from any form of help. The sun wasn't helping, scorching through my shirt. I swiped at my sweaty forehead, unable to resist a frustrated scream I had to muffle gag with my hand. I risked and looked behind us. Thankfully, we were around 10 minutes away from the main camp. The lake was nearby, glittering under a late afternoon sun, and all I wanted to do right then was to wade into the shallows and let the murky water swallow me up. The little guys couldn't swim. Maybe I'd be safe. Hell. This is bad. Harry Carlyle broke the silence after my frustrated cry. With his eyes glued to the wall, he took off his hat and ran a hand through dark brown curls, which were catching the light of the sun, setting strands of light across his forehead. None of us were in great shape after spending days hunkered down in a secret bunker. Harry was no exception. His short-sleeved Camp Redwood shirt was still covered with vomit, discolored with days' worth of sweat stains and lack of showers. He bent over, grasping hold of his knees. What do we do? I could tell by the tone of his voice he was freaking out, and I didn't blame him, but Harry was still on my mind. His signature was undoubtedly all over every Project Spearhead file, despite him repeatedly insisting he had nothing to do with it. At that moment, I could almost believe him. The boy looked exhausted and frustrated, pained. He surprised me by slipping to his knees and burying his head in the dirt and screaming into the rough soil. I was struck then by the sudden memory of flames. I'd been sitting around campfires for weeks at Redwood, but this one didn't feel like it took place at a camp. Instead, it felt more personal. I could almost see it, flickering orange, sparking at the backs of my eyes, and the sour taste of beer in my throat, like the memory was trying to push itself to the surface. This moment felt nostalgic and yet close, as if it happened yesterday, like both the past and the present had entangled in one. If I concentrated, I swore I could hear the murmur of voices, phantom laughter in my head and a cool night breeze grazing my cheeks. Earth to Josie! I snapped out of it quickly. You're asking me? I kicked the dirt again. I thought Rowan was our camp leader. Harry lifted his head after a moment, his eyes flicking to me. You know he can't make rash decisions right now. Exactly, I said. We both know he's not back to his normal self. He's both right now, a little kid and a teenager. I shuddered. I'm sorry, did I forget to mention our so-called head counselor was playing with a human eye like a damn cat? Well, why aren't you taking it seriously? Harry's gaze skated the horizon, cotton candy-colored clouds blurring into twilight. Because the sun is going to your head. I could practically hear his eyes rolling. Harry took 3 strides towards the wall and pressed his face into rough brick. So, that's it, right? He muffled into rough cement. We are really going to die at this damn summer camp? I'm going to die, I corrected him. They want you two and Carmel because you're apparently special. Harry made a scoffing noise into the wall. I was starting to think he was setting up camp there, planning to tell all of his grievances to the cement. Oh yeah, because that's a good thing? You've heard what they've done to Teddy and the others, and you think them wanting us for something is special? His voice broke a little. I'd rather have your fate. The boy's words made me realize how little I was compared to the others. While they and Carmel were part of some grand psychotic scheme, I was just needed for extra bulk. Why don't you talk to your friends? I said, after letting the boy throw several punches into the soil. I was going to comment on his hits being surprisingly strong enough to shake the ground. Harry didn't look at me after calming down, resorting to tracing the earth with his toes of his shoes. Who? The CIA. I was surprised by his retort, even if it was equally sarcastic. Oh, you think I'm the CIA? He stepped closer to me, his breath in my face. In case you haven't noticed, this is bigger than the CIA. Whoever is in charge of this project is way higher up. So you're admitting you're a sleeper? Oh, that's not what I... Then what? I demanded, cutting him off. Why are your fingerprints quite literally all over this? Harry folded his arms, his expression darkening. You're still talking about this? He groaned. Josie. He planted his hands on my shoulders. I'm not a spy, okay? Yes, my writing being on those documents was weird, but we're also dealing with animal crackers which turn us into littles. His lips curved into the slightest of smirks. I'm pretty sure it would be easy for a group of scientists to use my writing as some kind of red herring. They're trying to turn us against each other, obviously, and that's not going to happen. He squeezed my shoulders and I felt momentary comfort. I was so tired. I hadn't slept properly in days in fear of Eleanor coming to smoke us out, and the urge to just sink into the boy's chest was suddenly overwhelming. Luckily, I had self-control. I took a step back, and he dropped his arms. That's sobering, yes, I said, but I'm still going to try waking you up with those trigger phrases we found. When he tried to speak, I shook my head. Like it or not, you're our only way out. I had made it clear several times to the two of them that I had no intention to use the trigger phrases we found taped to the back of the door in the bunker when searching for more intel. But the more I was really thinking about it, if there were sleeper agents capable of taking down a group of 40-year-old tweens, I had no choice but to try it at least, because it was either that, or I gave the littles what they wanted, the boys, whatever they needed. Rowan, Carmel, and Harry were the keys to their plan. We needed a miracle, and those trigger phrases were our best shot. Harry, of course, was against the idea. He did that thing he always did when he scrunched up his nose and curled his lip. It reminded me of a toddler not getting their way. I saw it exclusively when the littles were taking advantage of his piggybacking service. "Josie, I'm not a spy." "You could be," I said stiffly. "And until we figure out what is going on with you, I don't trust you. You said it yourself. Your writing was all over the kids' files, so at some point, regardless of you remembering or not, you've been a part of this project. So, why did you bring me out here?" He inclined his head. "You don't trust me, and yet you bring me on your little mission to find an exit." I shrugged. "I was partly hoping we would be attacked and your natural instincts would kick in." "So I'm your lab rat?" "Partially." Harry did the scrunchy nose thing again. "What the hell, dude?" He looked like he was going to argue before deciding against it. Instead, he slipped onto his Ray-Bans and gestured behind me with a sigh. "We should probably get going before those little freaks come looking for us and realize we've left our safe house." I didn't know how to explain and put into words that to survive, we had to try everything. And if there was a sliver of a chance that Harry really was some kind of sleeper agent, I was going to take advantage of that. I hadn't forgotten about Carmel, Kaylin, and Olive. Rowan too, no matter how screwed up he was. I was counting on getting all of us out. I turned on my heels and started to head back to camp. I didn't look at him because that would make me weak. "Right, let's go." There was something going at the camp when we got back. I was startled by an intense blue light illuminating from the lunch cabin, and I had half a mind to turn and run. Then the screams started. Just like Teddy, they sounded both human and not, a horrifying mix of man and machine wailing for death. I found myself paralyzed, crouched behind Cassie's cabin, their phantom screams rattling my skull, sending my thoughts into overdrive. "Josie." I felt warm fingers wrapping around my elbow and pull me back. Harry was thankfully there, dragging me away before I could expose us. It was enough to snap me out of it, enough to drive me into fight or flight. When we made it back to Allison's cabin, Rowan was sleeping. He had conked out halfway through a pack of gummy worms. I spent the next few hours going through each trigger phrase written on the yellow sticky note we found taped to the door. I figured if we were going to try and wake Harry up, he would have to be restrained in case he was triggered to hurt us, or even himself. "Is this really necessary?" "Yes," I said, squinting at the third trigger phrase. The two of us were sitting cross-legged in front of each other, Harry breathing heavily and me trying to make myself calm. Harry pulled gingerly at the jump rope restraints we had managed to loop around his wrists. I was expecting something out of him, but all I got were his wide eyes staring back at me. The latest phrase was twisting my brain. It sounded like a kid's book. I took a deep breath. "Green tigers do not live independently." Harry didn't move, making a deal of blinking rapidly back at me. "No, I mean," he gestured to his arms pinned behind his back. "Why did you have to make them so tight?" "Because you're a spy, dude." Rowan had woke up, intrigued by my attempts to wake up a possible sleeper. He was pretending to go through the Eleanor Summers footage again, but the boy was clearly invested in what we were doing. Sitting slumped in the spinning chair, he leaned his fist on his chin. There were various things about Rowan I wanted to point out, but I was too scared to. The tips of his fingers were still stained red, and I had no idea if it was old or new. Rowan Alice used to be the one guy at camp I used to think looked older than he was, and acted older than he was. Instead of taking part in camp activities, he chose to sit on a branch and read pretentious classics. Yeah, he was one of those guys. The slight stubble on his chin would definitely get him served alcohol, and his allegiance and quick thinking would easily sway you if you were skeptical. Now he was the complete opposite. Maybe I was imagining things, but he had definitely gotten younger in the face, even if it was just a year or two. And I'm not talking about his appearance, however. Rowan's mentality was drastically different from the guy who held crisis meetings and ordered all of us around like we were his own children. This guy had a certain childish twinkle in his eye, when I happened to catch it. A twitch in his lip, which was constantly a wide smile like he was constantly seeing butterflies. Before being force-fed animal crackers, the guy had maintained his hair and hygiene no matter what happened. Now he looked like he'd been dragged through a forest, literally. There was still grass and leaves caught in his sandy hair, his Camp Redwood shirt torn in odd places. He yawned, curling up on the chair, apparently getting comfy. No hard feelings, but we got to keep you under investigation. Like Josie said, your name was all over those shady documents. Even his voice was different. I couldn't call it a squeak, but it was close to one. I'm not a spy, Harry grumbled, ducking his head. I think I would know if I was. What, some kind of government agent? That's the whole point of them. Rowan, still with lingering childish traits, winked at him. They don't know either. He raised his hand and mimed the finger guns, protruding them into his temples and pretending to pull the trigger. Adapting a storytelling tone, he lowered his voice to a whisper, like he was talking to the kids. They can live their whole lives without realizing it. I could tell from his tone he was getting excited with the idea of sleeper agents. Maybe it was a kid thing. Rowan sat up straight with wide eyes. Cruelly brainwashed by a secret organization at a young age and turned into super soldiers? These guys have no family, no friends. His gaze flicked to Harry, his lips twitching into a teasing grin. Only the insatiable urge to kill and follow orders. They don't have brains to feel or emotions. And that? He did a dramatic spin on the chair. I could tell he was reveling in the look of horror on Harry's face. That is the most dangerous thing about them. The inability to have free will, because what happens when they come face to face with people they used to love? People from their old life. With both of us enthralled in his speech, the boy smirked. They kill them, family members and friends, with one simple order, bam! Harry jumped, and I am ashamed to say I did too. Rowan blew his imaginary finger guns. With one single and yet perfect headshot, it's all over. There's blood everywhere. There's brains. He giggled. Brains! And it's like so gross. With the way he kept adding to his story, getting progressively more excited and practically vibrating in the chair, the boy was reminding me more and more of my little sister, which terrified me. Because if this was him back to himself, was this his new normal? Rowan, stop. It took every ounce of my being not to yell at him. You're acting like a child. I was frowning at a sign on the wall warning us to mind our head. It wasn't even a low ceiling, and yet that was the 4th time I had seen that sign. Harry looked mildly horrified. Usually he was the one who told the ghost stories. I could tell even he was questioning his own identity at that moment, and I paused interrogating him with phrases. I'm sorry, but who out of us ate our weight in animal crackers? Against my will, Rowan yawned again, doing another spin on the chair. I had to turn around and shoot him a glare. That's the 2nd time you've thrown me being turned into a kid in my face, which is not fair. Did I ask to be stuffed full of poison? Well, you didn't exactly fight against Eleanor. I was tied up, and I'm pretty sure you were in La La Land at that point. I'm allergic to peanut butter, so no, Harry rolled his eyes. I snapped out of it when my body reminded me. That sounds like a you problem, dude. Harry groaned, tipping his head back. Oh my gosh, Rowan. You used to be cool, and now you're like an annoying little brother. Touché. Shut up, both of you. I found my voice, grabbing a pen and scribbling out the first line of trigger phrases, which were a no-go. Rowan, annoyingly, is right, I said, ignoring the guy's noise of glee. If he kept spinning around on that chair, I was going to kill him. The blur of movement at the corner of my eye was driving me mad. Focusing on Harry, I took a break from the trigger phrases for a moment, poking him in the cheek. It was supposed to be lighthearted, but the guy looked offended. For the 3rd time, we can't ignore that at some point you have signed off on all those files, which means you are part of Spearhead, I shrugged. I'm not saying you are, but we have to be smart if we're going to survive against a group of deranged scientists. Rowan chuckled. What she said. Why aren't we paying attention to the guy who clearly has allegiances to those freaks? Harry stuck out his tongue at Rowan, which was surprising on multiple levels. Wasn't he supposed to be the normal one? Aren't you their favorite counselor? I was literally mind-controlled by preservatives, Rowan shot back. And I'm not the only one. You and Carmel are on their radar too. Yeah, but we're not the ones playing with eyes. I'm too tired to argue with you, the boy responded in a yawn, cuddling into the chair armrest like a cat. Also, you're a noodlehead. Ignore him, I told Harry. Just focus on me, all right? You have to look at me. I am. It's time to make the donuts. I articulated it perfectly. Harry surprised me with a laugh. That one can't be real. It is. Shush. I cleared my throat. The strawberry moon will rise in July. When nothing happened, I frowned. Maybe I'm not saying them right. I peered at the next one, mentally speaking it and then muttering it to myself to get an idea of the tone. Or, Harry shrugged, pulling at his restraints, I'm just spitballing here, but maybe I'm not a secret government sleeper agent after all? Be mindful of the deep ravine. This time I practically shouted it in his face, only to get his wide smile in return. Josie, this isn't working. It will. I was growing increasingly more frustrated. Just try and listen to them, okay? Don't push them out. I tried one more time, leaning close and scrunching up the sticky note in my hand. Harry's expression stayed stoic, though from the contortions in his forehead and the twitch in his lips, he was trying so hard not to laugh. It looks like it will rain tonight. I was surprised then when Rowan jolted in the chair suddenly. He lifted his head, his eyes wide. I was seeing him back to his usual self for the flicker of a second, his expression contorted with fright, lips curling into a scowl. Do you guys smell that? Smell what? I sniffed the air, but there was nothing that was out of the ordinary. I had grown used to the combined stink of our body odor. Rowan wrinkled his nose. He sat up straighter. That, he whispered, it smells like burning. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant before Harry went stiff suddenly. I sensed his entire body seemed to brace itself. His eyes hardened. Untie me, he said in a croak. But my shaking hands went to the boy's restraints. His were balled into fists. I glimpsed muscles bulging through the back of his shirt and forearms. His demeanor reminded me of an animal growing territorial. Something is wrong, he said in a sharp breath. Harry's frightened eyes found mine. Wrong, he said again, blinking rapidly. Something is wrong. When I pulled the last of the rope from his arms, Rowan shocked me with a piercing cry, which sent him tumbling off of the chair. His trembling hands planted over his ears, lips carved into an O. His eyes were wide with terror, with agony I couldn't understand, childish terror, which catapulted him back to his real age. Before I could hesitate, I was crawling over to him, attempting to snap the boy out of it, but he was inconsolable, his eyes almost unseeing, his body contorting with every shriek. It took me a moment to realize Harry was the same, but instead of a piercing shriek of a scream, he was wailing into his knees as if to escape something. His body seemed to jolt left and right, like he was being electrocuted, when I saw glimpses of sharp red pooling between his fingers and down the back of his neck. Something sickly crept up my throat. Rowan was somehow worse. His whole face contorting like it was its own separate being, rivulets of intense red dripping from his nose and mouth, and staining his hands desperately pressed over his ears. It was a synchronized cry, I realized, after concluding that no matter what I did, I couldn't save them. It was a sound only they could hear, a high-pitched screech like a dog whistle, which was only affecting them. It was the kids, I thought, surely. If they could disembowel counselors, I'm sure they'd have no problem engineering a sound which would only affect certain people. Stumbling back, I had two choices. I could either try and help them, try and block out this phantom noise slowly killing them, or I could leave them and find a safer place. With that choice in my mind, I barely noticed the phone beginning to ring under Allison's desk. The same old-fashioned trilling rang in my head, and I managed to reach under and grab the receiver, my heart in my throat. Please, I managed to squeak out, trying to ignore Harry, who was trying to rip out his hair, his eyes rolling into the back of his head. I saw the whites, blood vessels popping one by one. When he crumpled to the ground, I thought he was dead, but his wails continued into the floor, and I wanted them to stop. I wanted him to die because I couldn't stand there hearing him screaming for help which wasn't coming. I couldn't help them, and it was killing me. The kids were clearly trying to smoke us out, this time targeting the boys. Still, though, I had my secret weapon, the Spearhead Project. There are 3 of us left, I panted down the phone. You have to help us. I'm at Camp Redwood. You need to get us out of here. Do you hear me? You need to get us out. Attempts to fix the current situation have been unsuccessful, Miss Greenfield. The woman with the British accent's voice came through in a rush of static, cutting me off. Her voice was monotone, and I wondered if she was in fact a programmed bot. All efforts for manual activation have failed from the disaster zone. The signal appears to have been sabotaged. I repeat, the E.485 frequency has been sabotaged. Designated models 0115, 0116, and 0118 are now officiated as being faulty and no longer needed for Protocol 9AXC5. Please stand by for standard protocol deactivation. Thank you for your service, Agent Salta, Agent Al-Sirak, Agent Lemrak. My grip loosened on the phone and I felt my legs started to give away. You're the one doing this to them? When Rowan dropped to his knees, blood dripping from his nose, my stomach jumped into my throat. There was no way. I figured it was an attack from the kids, but I was wrong. Instead, this frequency was coming from the phone. I thought back to the video footage, Agent Lemrak interviewing Eleanor Summers, Harry's signature on the paperwork. Can you say that again? I found myself saying a breath, but the dead ringing tone was already clanging in my skull, a robotic countdown laced with the static. I grabbed the pen I had been writing with, scribbling those names down, my hands shaking. Preparing emergency shutdown protocol. Thank you for your service, Agent Salta, Al-Sirak, Lemrak. The voice continued, which was just another stab in the gut. I heard Salta before, I heard Lemrak, but writing them down, I realized what they meant. Salta, Al-Sirak, Lemrak. I was a damn idiot. No wonder the Littles wanted them in Carmel. Why they were so important to their plan. Slowly, I could feel myself start to crumble. The phone slipped from my clammy hands, but I could still hear the woman beginning an emergency shutdown. I didn't feel the impact when my knees hit the ground, but I did start to sense something twisted and sour tickling the back of my nose and throat. By the time I had noticed it, it was already choking the bunker. But somehow I didn't care about the stars in my eyes, or my own blood being projected onto my hands with every wet-sounding cough exploding from my lungs. I could still hear their names, and every time I said each of them, more and more of me shattered. Atlas, Carlisle, Carmel, 18, 17, 16, 15. Laying on my back while my head spun, I was partially aware the boys' screaming had cut off. Instead, they were just sitting there, eyes wide and unseeing, the blankest I had ever seen them. There was so much blood running down their faces, and I imagined something rooted inside of them tearing their minds apart from the inside. Letting out another strangled cough, which was definitely biological warfare courtesy of the kids. Not enough to kill, but definitely a warning not to mess with them. My gaze flicked across the bunker, taking everything in. The paperwork we had been going through, the chair Rowan had been spinning around on, the ropes Harry's arms had been entangled in. I was frowning at the walls and then the ceiling. Please mind your head when you step down the stairs. Drinking in the words slowly, my cotton candy thoughts exploding into one blurry mess. But then I was a little more awake, this time turning my gaze to the wall where the same sign had been taped to the wall. Please mind your head when you step down the stairs. And there it was again, taped to the desk, and underneath the laptop, hidden in plain sight. It had been there all along, and yet I only realized when I wasn't thinking about it, but my mind was being suffocated. Something seemed to snap inside of me, and I sat up, driven by pure adrenaline. Which one had pressed over my mouth and nose? I forced myself into a sitting position and dragged myself to Harry. With one hand pressed over my mouth and nose, I forced myself into a sitting position and dragged myself to Harry, whose head was lolled at an unnatural angle, his eyes closed. Part of me wanted to smash up the phone, knowing what these bastards had done to their sleeper agents. Now they were no longer usable. The boy almost resembled a doll. Was this the so-called sleeper which had been planted inside Redwood? Empty eyes, empty everything. He was like a shell with a human face. No better than Eleanor's experiments. When I grabbed hold of his arms, I had to hold him steady, his body cut from these puppet strings which had held him. Harry! I could barely speak, my voice more of a croak. I knew he was awake and aware, but a singeing, almost burning smell was coming from directly inside his head, as blood ran from his nostrils in shades of red and pink. Now I knew what the burning was when I pressed my face against his and sucked in a lungful of poisoned air. It was him. He was a defect being set alight from the inside. You need to look at me, okay? When he didn't, instead crumbling in my arms, I struggled to hold him upright. Twisting my head to Rowan, he seemed in a better state, kind of. At least he was still sitting straight. My last words were barely audible. Please mind your head when you step down the... No sooner had the words left my mouth before the sounds of footsteps coming from above, the unmistakable murmur of giggling getting closer and closer. Harry dropped to the ground like he had been severed from his puppet strings. I wasn't aware when I slipped to the floor, whatever had filled my lungs finally taking its toll. Through flickering eyes, I could see our barricade being blown through, the ground rumbling beneath me, throwing me into something warm. Rowan. His body was curled up against the wall, hemorrhaging from the ears. It was only when I was truly taking in the stink curling in the back of my nose and throat as Eleanor Summers' mechanical grin popped out of nowhere, when I realized I had smelled it before. I had choked on it before. The circle of kids looming above me let out a shrill squeak of, "Found you!" When I found the dark, and beyond that, a memory I thought was a dream. Firelight flickered in the back of my eyelids. The blur of orange and shady smoke was mesmerizing. I stared real hard at the fire like I was told to, at smoldering shades of yellow and orange colliding, thick black smoke billowing into the air while our faces illuminated the circle. I tightened my grip on my beer, swallowing another mouthful. It was cheap stuff, but had just enough burn to get me tipsy. I felt good at that moment, relaxed. My head was starting to spin, but it was the good spinning, like I was going round and round on a carousel. I wasn't sure why I felt apprehension at that moment. It was just a game, right? So why did I want to jump up and go home? Why did I want to squeeze my eyes shut? Milo's words rattled in my skull as I squinted into the fire. Come forth, those who are no longer with us. Ghosts weren't real, I thought dizzily. They couldn't be. Not when science and logic existed. However, when the flames began to grow increasingly more erratic, I couldn't resist leaning forward and... there. Something warm crept its way up my throat. There was a shadow twisted in the smoke, a very human-like thing stepping directly from the trees. From the hollow darkness I had been too scared to fully take in, finding solace in flickering and illuminated sparks spitting from the fire. The others started to murmur to each other as the thing took a step out of the trees. Clea shuffled back with a cry, and Milo and JJ turned twin shades of sickly pale. It was a guy, older, by maybe a year. Shaggy reddish hair tied into a loose ponytail. His clothes were a simple leather jacket and jeans, but looking at his face, he was bruised. Every part of him exhausted and battered. His eyes, when I caught them, were nothing but twin pools of oblivion glaring back at us. Holy hell, Milo hissed out. I didn't think that would actually work. Downing his beer, he whooped. All right, name, age, occupation, and... His lips quirked into a grin. How you died, man? The guy inclined his head, his mouth curling into the start of an amused smile. I'm not a ghost, jackass. His British accent was jarring. And? Milo leaned back, crossing his legs. Play along, bro, or I'll call the cops and tell him a grown-ass man is screwing with minors. But he looks our age, Clea hummed. And he's kinda cute. I don't give a damn. Milo's eyes were hard. State your truth, or I get my dad on the line. The guy rolled his eyes, raising both arms like he was surrendering. Samuel Joseph Wilder. He surprised me by responding, and now that I looked at him, this guy definitely was not dead, unless dead people carried a gun latched to their belt and a cheap iPhone sticking from their jeans pocket. 19 years old, he shrugged. I guess you could say I'm an ex-student. He paused, and I caught emotion flicker across his face, his hands balling into fists. I was killed No, murdered by my town. Milo leaned back, cracking open another beer and taking a sip. Clea leaned closer to him, her eyes wide. Playing along, huh? I like it. State your truth. The guy nodded, lowering his arms. His dark eyes flicked to each of us, drinking us all in. I just escaped from a secret government facility, doubling as a summer camp, which has converted half of my town's kids into mindless super soldiers. There was a pause before Clea burst into nervous giggles. Milo cocked his head. I said state your truth, not plagiarize the Hunger Games. Ignoring Milo, the guy turned his eyes to me. J.C. Greenfield? He took a step forward before seemingly deciding against it. I didn't move or speak, my heart in my throat. I didn't have to reply. This strange boy continued, his lips curling. You're going to die tonight, J.C. At that moment, I realized why I had been feeling nauseous all night, why my mind had been anticipating something all day, and why, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't brush off his words. Maybe part of me was expecting this. The stranger's tone was too cold to ignore, the state of him too real to brush off as a joke. Suddenly, it was just me, him, and fate glaring down on us, my life as I knew it exploding into nothing in the charred remains of the dying fire. His voice echoed in my head, collapsing into white noise, and when I noticed how truly inhuman he looked, I fully took him in, illuminated in firelight. If you don't get the hell out of this town, you're going to have the same fate as me. I'm going to go out on a whim and say it's not 2018, and I've been at Camp Redwood for way longer than I realized.